Cold rain fell through the lattice of dying leaves, hissing against the ghost-white trunks of the weirwoods that crowned the hilltop like pale, twisted candles. Beneath their bleeding faces, the last council of the children of the forest gathered in a ring whose curve had been worn smooth across 10,000 years of midnight rites and blood-bright supplications. They were few now, fewer than the fingers on a single giant's hand, but the power that shivered in the air between them had not diminished with their number. It pulsed, slow and tidal, inside the black earth and inside their own dark eyes. Leaf, who had once been known by another name in the green dawn of the world, pressed her small, bark-brown palm to the damp soil. Her breath misted in the chill, carrying a question older than speech. The green seers slid their roots of thought deep into the quiet beneath the hill, down through layers of memory, until they touched the sigh of molten stone and the quiet hum of the sleeping dead. When they rose again to the surface of their shared mind, no one needed to speak aloud. The truth they had found was already there in every member of the ring, shining with an iron clarity that left no room for doubt. Westeros was lost. Men, first and undull alike, carved its forests to stumps, hammered its hills into fortresses, salted its sacred pools with steel and fire. The pact was broken, its promises drowned beneath the weight of kingdoms and crowns. The children could not win a war of axes and castles. But beyond the boiling veil of the narrow sea lay another shore, one whose lords had never tasted defeat, whose skies churned with scaled shadows, whose forges birthed sorceries hot enough to melt the bones of magic itself. Valyria, a fortress raised upon rivers of fire, 1,000 dragons chained to mortal will. If that empire fell, the men of Westeros would bleed one another dry in the ruin that followed, and the children would inherit a world scoured clean. They had forged a weapon once before, in despair and fury. The Night King, fathered of ice and blade and stolen man-flesh, bound by dragonglass through a human heart. He had been shaped to shield them from the first men, then turned by a will stronger than their own. Captured, shattered, imprisoned in the labyrinthine frost of the shivering sea, his armies ground to dust by time and tide. It had taken centuries to drown the memory of what they created. Now, in the hush beneath the weirwoods, the children reached across the dark to seize that memory anew. Leaf tasted the iron on her tongue before she felt the blade. She drew the obsidian shard across her palm in a single practiced cut and let the blood patter into the black mud circle. One by one, the others followed, each adding their lifeblood to the hungry soil, until the ring shone like a broken garnet necklace. They chanted without voices, weaving root and river, wind and winter, until the air thickened and rippled, distorting the world like heat over summer stone. In the north, the far, forgotten north, where no ship dared sail and no raven flew, a pulse answered them, deep and resonant as a glacier's heartbeat breaking free of its mountain womb. The Night King opened eyes that had not known motion since the wall was young. Blue fire licked through crystal pupils, banishing the black. Chains of rune-carved ice, anchored to pillars of frozen stone, cracked and spat shards like glass in a forge. He lifted one hand, and the frost recalled its master. Links shattered, bonds dissolved, a storm hatch flung wide. The dead around him stirred at once. Skeletal figures in rags of ironmail rose from centuries-old thrones of frost. Eyeless giants ground their tusks in jagged silence. Spiders big as warhounds tested limbs sheathed in hoarfrost. Beyond the ice caverns, night poured itself across steppe and sea, bearing blades of wind and claws of snow. He remembered Westeros, a land of continuous night in his dreaming, but another vision now coiled within the runes that lined his resurrected skin. Fire mountains and towers of black glass glittering under alien constellations, and dragons singing above streets of smoke. He tasted that fire on an unseen wind and felt the children's ancient will guiding his steps. Valyria called him across half the world. In answer, he raised his spear of dragonglass toward the moon, and its cold light fractured into shards that sped outward in all directions. Each shard became a spear of hoarfire lodged in a dead heart. Each dead heart came alive. The long night of the world stirred from its second slumber. Months trailed behind the Night King in a twisting wake of darkness and rumor. Fisherfolk from Ibn swore they saw glaciers crack in the summer sea. Great jagged shelves drifting south laden with shimmering armies whose eyes were lanterns of blue. The seal hunters of Pretrock spoke of entire pods frozen in the instant of breach, their bodies cartwheeling in translucent ice like jewels beneath new moon. On the lonely light, furthest western watch of the Iron Islands, half the lighthouse collapsed beneath the weight of rime-plagued winds. Survivors staggered ashore at 10 towers babbling of a ship made of tooth and frost whose crew never once drew breath or blinked. Every tale carried south and east on gull wings, changing shape, gaining teeth. By the time the Night King reached the ruins of Yin on black-jungled Sithorios, where no snow had fallen since the breaking, winter's shadow rode ahead of him like a herald. The jungle died in silence, leaves curling to crisp ash at the touch of the cold. Scaled horrors that had prowled those dark beneath canopies since before the first men turned brittle and shattered where they stood. In their frail camps, the men of the Basilisk Isles woke to frost-webbed beards and the soft hush of snow smothering their fires, and knew only one prayer: flee. But there was no outrunning wind itself. The Night King needed no ships. The sea had remembered an older shape at his whisper. It convulsed, froze, fractured, then knit itself into causeways of ghost-pale ice that hissed and steamed beneath the black tropical stars. Across those bridges his host marched, silent as thought. Where they passed, the water behind them shattered into blue shards that drifted like drowned diamonds. In Valyria, the dragons felt the hush before the storm. Atop Trace Volcanes, where 3 red-hot throats pumped molten breath into the night sky, old Valyrian lifted his head and tasted the smoke. All 3 of his remaining eyes narrowed. He let out a roar whose echo cracked obsidian 2 leagues away, waking scores of lesser drakes dozing in basalt eyries. They spread scaled sails and circled the fire mountains in widening gyres, but saw only the familiar dance of lava against starry dark. Still, unease coiled beneath every wing beat. The dragons refused their master's calls, or answered with flames that guttered in the chill that crept slowly across the peninsula. Smiths in the freehold found their forges stubbornly dull. Molten steel hissed to iron before the hammer fell twice. Slaves digging deep for living fire emerged coughing frost instead of ash. The city wives of Valyria tied red thread around their wrists, muttering charms against night spirits long dismissed as children's tales. The archons of the freehold dispatched swift coracles to the summer isles, to Lys, to Volantis, seeking ember wine, obsidian, secrets, anything that might explain the failing heat. No one yet suspected the true shape of the approaching doom. How could they? Valyria was the center, the navel, the unconquered core. The world bent like hot iron beneath its dragons. What threat could crawl from elder ice to challenge rivers of living flame? A girl named Nyra smelled death in the cooling breeze. She was no dragon lord, only a pale-faced healer's daughter who carried herbs in a bronzed bowl from tower to tower. But Nyra's dreams wandered roads no map had drawn. She saw leafless woods standing in snow older than empire, and children with eyes black as beetles singing in tongues of thunder. One night, while she ground moon blossom petals into paste for a magister's cough, her vision drew her through wall and firmament to an endless plain of frozen water. There, beneath a tattered crown of ice, stood a king whose eyes were twin glaciers. He held out a hand, and the frost blossomed upward, sculpting itself into a screaming woman locked in crystal. Nyra woke with frost on her lashes. She told no one, for in Valyria dreams were studied, bought, stolen, an unwise currency for a slave to own. Yet each night the dream returned, unfolding a footstep farther. An army assembling, giants wrapped in frost, wolves with glass teeth, wights whose ribs rattled like chimes. An armada of silent ships cut from black ice. A spear made of night itself, its tip drinking the stars. On the 7th night, she saw Valyria's red skies cloud with ash that was not ash, and dragons tumbling from the heavens trailing blue fire. When she could no longer endure the terror alone, Nyra crept before dawn to the great pyramid of the 13 Flames, where the Talon of Uryx, archseer to the Dragon Lords, held court. The Talon was no fool. He knew the worth of fear, and Nyra's confession reeked of it. Quietly, he set her dreams beside a dozen whispered rumors. Shivering waves near Qohor, icebergs drifting past Noth, the sudden dying of summer sea pearls a sickly blue. He swallowed the terror that knotted in his throat like a living thing and summoned Horus Valerion, first among Valyria's admiral lords. Within the hour, a sky of wings rose from Dragonhome, and Blackkeel warships parted the sea southward, their hulls sheathed in crimson-slicked obsidian. But even Dragonfire could not outrun Night Wind. 3 days out from the Isles of Noth, Valerion's fleet vanished beneath a sheet of rank frost thick enough to bear a marching host. Some sailors survived long enough to see the ice-speared silhouettes approaching before silence took them. By the time smoke coils from the burning ships reached Valyria's watchtowers, the Night King's vanguard had already crossed the shattered causeways of the Basilisk Isles. The Freehold's unreadiness was the Night King's first ally. His second was doubt. Valyrians argued over the impossible tidings. No frost could endure the furnace gales of their forges. No ice-spawn army could stride the scalding beaches where tiny pockets of air ignited beneath bare feet. Yet temples began to empty of flame priests, and dragon masters muttered of drakes refusing their keepers, of eggs cooling in their birthing fires. Still the Night King advanced without hurry. He harvested strength as he went. Coral tombs in the summer sea yielded warrior dead clad in barnacled mail. Forgotten battlefields surrendered 10,000 shade wraiths. The sealed crypts of old guys cracked open at his whispered command. He turned half the scarmen of the islands to brittle statues before the rest bent the knee in terror and marched behind his standard of frozen void. At each new conquest he paused, splitting a fraction of his will to linger within the conquered dead, so that even when his main host moved on, winter remained behind like a scab that would never heal. Valyria at last understood the noose tightening round its throat. Dragon lords called convocation beneath the open vault of the Doomforge, the vast caldera whose fiery lake tempered every blade destined for empire. They arrived cloaked in smoke and pride, leading beasts whose wings blotted half the burning sky. Meraxes the Thundersleeper, Vagger of 3 tongues, ancient Valyrian himself. Magisters etched runes of binding into the basalt floor while pyromancers opened fissures that spilled molten stone across the rim. Here, they declared, they would meet cold with fire and unmake the monster that stole summer from the world. They did not know the children's hand guided every ice crystal in the Night King's crown, nor that the weirwoods of Skagos and Ashai alike now bled black sap in anticipation of a final offering. At the edge of sight, a sheet of night advanced across the water. Sailors perched in watchnests called it a mirage, but no mirage raises a scream from the sky. The dragons felt it first. Meraxes shrilled and veered eastward until his rider's neck snapped against the harness. Vagger coughed gouts of guttering blue flame and spiraled downward in a death turn. Valyrian alone steadied his beat, but each exhale of black fire now sputtered like oil on snow. Then the sea froze, not in creeping fingers, but in a single thunderclap that cracked the air like a giant's whip. Waves reared up, solidified, and lay down as still marble. Ships found themselves moored in glass. On that sudden plain of ice, the Night King came walking. Behind him poured a legion whose numbers no one could tally. Spearmen clad in hoarfrost armor, wolves the size of elephants, bear whites crowned in shards of glacier, silent priests whose severed tongues dangled from frozen cords at their throats. Above them circled riders on dead wyverns, their wings tatters of skin that nevertheless beat with inexorable rhythm. At the van marched giants bound shoulder to shoulder by chains of rime, dragging siege towers sculpted of crystal. Each footfall chimed like bellstone. Valyria answered with fire. Obsidian ballistae hurled molten shot that hissed to steam an instant before shattering against invisible walls of air colder than the void between stars. Dragons dove, beating thunder into the iron sky. Their flames struck the host and guttered into whirling clouds of smoke that froze to ash. From the shoreline, the arch-pyromancers cast their greatest art, drawing rivers of living magma into searing whips that writhed across the ice. Where they touched, dead warriors crumbled. But the gaps closed at once as ranks behind stepped into place, reknitting the wall of spears without pause. In the center of that tide walked the Night King. He carried no shield, wore no helm. A spear of black crystal glimmered in his grip, and as he strode he planted its butt against the ice, marking a slow, measured cadence. Each strike sounded a note deeper than thunder, and with every note, the dragons faltered. Great mare axes slammed into the caldera wall, his molten blood hissing where it met rain of frigid wind. Vagar's heartsong choked to silence. Valyrian still flew, but now his titanic wings shivered. Frost spidered across ancient scales. The children's chant wrapped the battlefield in unseen roots. From beyond horizon of world and time, they drew rivers of night and wove them through their creation. The Night King lifted his spear. He hurled it toward the sky where Valyrian wheeled, and the iron of the heavens parted like rotten cloth. The spear struck scale that had never known breach. A single pulse of crackling blue ran the length of the black dread. Then Valyrian screamed, a sound to sunder mountains. He toppled sideways, wings folding like broken sails, and smashed into the caldera lake with force enough to send a mile-high plume of lava skyrocketing into the star-bright night. Lava met storm ice. The world inhaled in shocked silence. Then the sky itself broke. Fire turned to black glass mid-flight, rained down in spears that impaled men and white alike. Steam geysers blasted holes through ice, only for the void within to flash freeze into mirror-bright domes. Valyrian towers melted at their bases and toppled into rifts that snapped shut like frozen jaws. The Doomforge cracked end to end. Its molten lake transformed to obsidian so swiftly that trapped drakes within entombed themselves alive. Yet the Night King strode on, untouched. He walked the caldera's broken floor, dragging the world's last warmth in chains behind him. With each step, sorceries older than dragons died. He found the 13 flames kneeling amid their shattered runes, skeletal hands raised in final petition. He reached out, brushed their cheeks like a lover saying farewell, and they crystallized into statues of perfect, terrified beauty, mouths forever open in halted incantation. High above, Nyra watched from a cracked observation balcony. She pressed trembling fingers to her lips, hearing her own earlier dream echo in the hurricane roar beyond. Somewhere inside her breast, a small voice asked whether this was justice or doom. She had no answer, but she felt the question burn. The Night King's gaze lifted to her perch. Across that gulf their eyes met. His twin voids of glacial blaze, her mortal hazel ringed with dream gold. Something shifted in that gaze, curiosity perhaps, or recognition. Then the balcony fractured under unseen frost, and Nyra plunged into the maelstrom of ash and snow. She did not die. Hands cold as moonlit iron caught her, and the world blinked to pale blue. Nyra opened her eyes to an unearthly hush. A field of stillness, towers of smooth ice growing from what had been Valyria's throbbing heart. She lay upon an altar carved in a single stroke from the frozen lava, its surface smooth as water. The Night King stood at its foot, spear reversed, its point resting beside her bare throat. She felt no fear now, only the steady beat of her blood, a tiny drum in an amphitheater of silence. "I dreamed you," she whispered, unsure whether her lips formed sound. Perhaps he heard, perhaps not. Either way, his frozen gaze shifted beyond her, toward the fire mountains whose hearts had finally stopped beating. In that stillness, Nyra felt a tether snapping far to the northwest, a song of green and leaf suddenly silent. The children's chant faltered. The Night King's head jerked, as though yanked by a hook. His ice crown flickered, younger here, older there, as discord rippled through the magic binding him. The children had used him again, and perhaps he remembered chains as clearly as they. He straightened, as though measuring an unseen horizon, then loosed a howl that cracked the air from east to west. All across the frozen peninsula, the dead halted mid-stride. Ice giants paused in the act of lifting basalt keeps. Frost wyverns wheeled and hovered. On the hill of obsidian gates, a dragon half-fused with glass tore itself free and staggered toward that voice. Nyra felt the tyranny inside that call. She felt, too, the moment something foreign slid inside it. Her dream-burning courage, or the last ember of Valyrian fire, she could not say. In a single reckless breath, she raised her blood-soaked palm, the very hand she had sliced the night of her confession, and pressed it to the spear's tip. Her blood hissed against crystal that had never known heat. A tiny crack bloomed in the spear's haft. It spread, blooming like a crimson flower in frost. The Night King's eyes widened. He tore the spear free from the altar and swung it in a wide arc, scattering shards of night crystal into the air. Where they landed, rime blossomed, except for one fragment that burned red and lay unclaimed, pulsing like a heart. Above, clouds churned. Somewhere deep, the old fires guttered once more. The Night King hesitated. In that pause, the dragon within the glass hill roared. Across the ice fields, broken drakes found renewed flame. From shattered calderas, tongues of magma licked upward, seeking purchase in a world suddenly uncertain. Nyra scrambled to her feet, seized the red-lit shard, and felt in its volcanic pulse the living memory of Valyria, of every dragon ever hatched, of every forge ever stoked, of every song sung in tongues older than men or children. She thrust the shard toward the sky. It blazed scarlet, a beacon piercing the rolling storm. The Night King recoiled, one hand clawing at the black ice circlet that bound his brow. Cracks spread across the crown. The spear shook in his grasp, shedding splinters of midnight that dissolved before they touched ground. Around them, the dead host trembled, uncertain. Nyra stepped forward. The shard sang in her fist. The Night King raised his spear for the killing blow. Far beneath the earth, the children of the forest watched through roots and memory, their work unraveling in flame. They had cast the dice of worlds and found them melting in the heat of unforeseen choice. Leaf whispered an ancient name, neither plea nor command, and for the first time since dawn's first light, the children of the forest let go of their creation. A sound like thunder wrapped in ice cracked across the ruined capital as the Night King's spear split from tip to haft. It fell in two pieces, each releasing a scream of blue fire that struck the ground and fled away like rivers. His crown shattered next, shards spiraling upward. His posture wavered, one knee bending. For an instant he seemed a man again, tall, gaunt, lost, and his gaze locked upon Nyra's. No words passed, yet she felt a plea, freedom, oblivion, perhaps forgiveness for crimes wrought at another's urging. She answered by planting the shard in the altar, driving it deep. A tower of scarlet flame erupted, scattering snow, ash, and sky. When the light receded, Nyra stood alone in a field of glass. The Night King was gone, melted into steam that drifted skyward to join the dawn. The sun rose crimson over Valyria, painting obsidian spires in blood-bright hues. Dragons circled, fewer now, their songs subdued but alive. The ice was receding, leaving behind lakes that hissed and steamed where fire still fought for breath. In the far distance, mountains that once spewed rivers of flame now lay cracked and silent, but beneath their ash-gray hides, embers stirred. Nyra walked the cooling plain, her bare feet trailing steam where frost lingered. She felt neither triumph nor sorrow, only the vast hollow that follows cataclysm. Somewhere, men and women crawled from broken towers, blinking at the miracle of dawn. Somewhere else, the children knelt among shattered weirwoods, wondering what price they had paid for vengeance incomplete. The shard of living fire lay fused to the altar, its glow softening to a quiet, coal-red heartbeat. Nyra touched it once more. A whisper curled within, not words, but a promise of renewal. She turned toward the horizon where sea met sky, and thought of the world beyond, of Westeros, of frozen wastes now perhaps warming, of the myriad peoples who would one day ask how Valyria survived a night made flesh. She did not know what story she would tell, only that the first breath of the new day tasted of cinders and winter together, salt and smoke, a flavor like the edge of becoming. And in the distance, beyond ruined towers and steaming rifts, a single dragon lifted its head and roared, greeting that uncertain dawn. The hush that followed the Night King's vanishing was not silence but a breathing thing, a slow, uncertain pulse filling the spaces where terror had lived. It spread outward from the cracked caldera like a newborn tide, lapping against every ruined tower, every glass-limbed corpse, every steam-hissing fissure in the obsidian plain. In that hush, even the dragons dared not cry again, for their world had changed and they did not yet know the shape of its new order. Nyra felt it first beneath her bare soles, a tremor smaller than heartbeat, tugging at the shard she had fused into the altar. When she knelt, laying her ear to the smooth, still warm surface, she heard a murmur like distant drums, a conversation of magma and ice, of fire that refused to die and frost reluctant to remain. She rose slowly, the red glow of the ember shard reflecting in her eyes. Around her, survivors crept from shelters of toppled stone. Soot-masked smiths, dragon seers with torn mantles, kitchen slaves whose hands shook around iron ladles turned weapons by necessity. They moved like shades, half convinced they still belonged to death. Some fell to their knees at the sight of her, not from worship but from the recognition that someone yet breathed in the heart of what had been an ending. Nyra did not speak. She lacked words equal to the moment. Instead, she turned her back to them and surveyed the frozen plain. Here stood towers sculpted in an instant of absolute zero, each needle-bright, impossibly delicate. There lay the shattered ribs of a dragon still steaming where inner furnaces battled cold. Beyond, a rampart of ice giants lay strewn like felled pines. Their arms snapped clean, their skulls split by sudden internal thaw. The battlefield had become a museum of opposites. Flame imprisoned in crystal, snow melted to glass, life and death locked in twin reflections. From the southeast, a figure limped toward her on a path of fissured snow. He wore the tattered cloak of a dragon lord, though half its clasps melted down his breast where dragonfire had scorched him. His beard was crusted in frost, his eyes red from smoke. As he neared, Nyra recognized Merson Lorak, titled scholar of living tongues, a man known more for quills than for courage. He stopped 3 paces from her and bowed with the stiffness of unaccustomed humility. "Lady," he said, voice rasping, "or healer or whatever name you keep. The Archons are dead, most of them. The Talon of Uryx breathes yet but scarcely. The order of things." He broke off, staring at the shard fused in black glass. "The order is broken," Nyra answered with the simple truth. "So we must birth another." Lorak's stare trembled between awe and fear. "Birth order? From this?" He gestured at the ruins. "We are scholars, smiths, riders. We know how to wield fire, not sculpt it anew. What remains of our dragons may not answer us. Their songs are wrong." "Then listen," Nyra said, and laid her hand on the altar again. The shard brightened, casting a crimson path across the glass. A sound flared, neither crack of ice nor roar of flame, but a mingling of both. A sustained chord like hammered bronze submerged in water. Far across the plain, a cluster of frost-trapped drakes answered with throaty, uncertain notes. Their ice prisons shimmered, fissuring along invisible fault lines. Lorak flinched. "Dragons freed by a slave girl? Dragons freed by Valyria," Nyra corrected gently. "I am no more than an ember you chose to ignore." Others gathered. An iron-scaled villain smith missing 2 fingers from frostbite. A Lysine priestess whose burnt robes still smoldered at the hems. A trio of young dragon boys smelling of oily scale. They formed an uneven crescent behind Lorak, eyes wide with the same mingled desperation. To them Nyra spoke. "Your fire does not lie in towers or forges. It lives in you. The Night King's winter severed your ties to it because you forgot to carry it yourselves. You chained your dragons, your gods, your faith to stone and steel. But stone melts, steel shatters. What matters is the song beneath. Wake it, and the flame follows." The priestess stepped nearer, her smeared face luminous in shard light. "How?" Nyra guided her by the wrist. Together they knelt at the altar. "Blood," Nyra whispered, "and truth." She nicked the woman's fingertip with a sliver of cooled obsidian, drew a bead of crimson, and let it slide onto the glass. A soft crack sounded, a hairline fracture racing across the altar's rim, melting frost as it went. Steam curled. The priestess gasped as a flicker of fire licked up her cut finger and sealed it painlessly. Behind them, Fragments of ice cascaded from a trapped drake's flank as its inner furnaces reignited. The creature shook itself free, blue eyes returning to molten gold. It spread wings patched with missing membranes and screamed a broken but living note into the dawn. Valyrians collapsed in weeping gratitude. Nyra turned away. Hers was not their ecstasy but something quieter, deeper. She sought the horizon where lava vents still glimmered. There, she knew, the survival of more than dragons must be decided. North of the broken caldera, at the rim of the peninsula, the ice sheet waned to a cracked mosaic of frost flows and steaming puddles. On one such floe lay a corpse that had once been Merix's rider, Lord Triarch Joran Mataris, whose death-bent neck hinted at the violence of his final flight. His armor lay scattered like toys in a child's tantrum, spear split in three, yet within his breast stirred not rot but cold, a whisper of blue embers reigniting. The Night King was gone, but echoes of his dominion lingered in every flesh he had touched. Joran's eyes snapped open, glacier-bright, devoid of self. He sat upright with perfect, disjointed grace and scanned the steaming coastline. Where he looked, surface frost thickened anew. His hands, once magic to command a dragon, now flexed as though searching for retained power. He found none. The root will behind his resurrection had been severed. But the gift of undeath carried its own cunning. Joran rose, gathering shards of his broken spear. With methodical detachment, he bound them into a jagged glaive, its haft wrapped in strips torn from his cloak. Then he set off along the shore, following the faint pulse of the Night King's memory. Toward the shard, toward the ember that had slain Winter's father. He knew no reasons, only imperative. Reclaim the ice or bury the ember beneath it. He was not alone in that awakening. Across the peninsula, pockets of whites regained motion. Some ice-ridden corpses of Valyrian soldiers, some frost bears, some shattered giants whose heads dragged themselves by one arm. Without the Night King's organizing mind, they moved like ants from a scattered hill, each pulled by vestigial purpose. Find warmth, kill, spread cold. Their path would be erratic, yet each step threatened to tear open the fragile truce dawning over the ruins. Nyra and Lorak led a growing procession across cracked obsidian toward the central vent where the three heads Ares had once risen. The air smelled of metal and rain, of sulfur gentled by snowmelt. Dragons followed above, more each hour, as shards of ice surrendered to thaw. Yet some drakes fell from the sky seconds after freeing themselves. Wings riddled by hidden frostburn, hearts rupturing from thermal shock. Each fall shook survivors' newfound hope. By the time the party reached the jagged basin of the middle vent, they numbered nearly 200. Smiths dragging anvils on sledges of half-melted ice, dragon keepers coaxing weakened mounts, slaves carrying the injured on makeshift litters. Among them strode two remaining arch-pyromancers, their crimson cloaks charred to ash, leaning on staffs fused of iron and black crystal. Within the basin hissed a lake of slag, lava cooled to viscous glass. Its surface bulged and cracked, smoldering, but no fresh fountains rose. The volcano's heart still beat, yet its pulse faltered like an exhausted smith at his bellows. Nyra pressed her palms to the cooling crust. Through its thickness, she felt the fire's faint drum. She closed her eyes and listened deeper. Below the drum lay a stutter, a rhythm fighting to quicken then failing again. A heart attack of the world. "The vent is dying," she said quietly. "It cannot die," Lorak insisted, kneeling opposite her. "The legend says these fires are eldest children of the 14 flames. As long as any dragon lives, they live." "Legends are memories of choices," Nyra replied. "We must choose now whether this one survives." She straightened, scanning the rim. "I need obsidian powder, finely ground and living flame, and voices, many voices." The smiths exchanged wary glances. One, older, hairless, eyes rimmed in raw burns, pointed at dripping slag. "We have crucibles, not powder. Our mills lie buried under ice." "Then break the glass," Nyra said. "Strike it to sand. The dragons will give it edge." The smith nodded, perhaps trusting the calm in her tone more than the sense of her order. He barked at his companions. Moments later, hammers rang against glazed crust. Fragments splintered, tinkling to the basin floor in shimmering piles. Meanwhile, Nyra gathered the archpyromancers. They were haggard, robes reeking of burnt hair and despair, yet within their sunken eyes flickered embers of pride. She asked them not for sorcery but for memory, the cadences of Valyria's oldest hymns to the 14 flames. Though their voices cracked, they recalled the words. Nyra arranged them in a circle at the lake's edge, each holding a shard of cooling lava like a torch. She placed her own ember shard at the circle's center. Its glow pulsed weakly, as though drained by distance from the altar where it had rooted. Nyra knelt beside it, inhaled the mingled smoke and snow air, and began to hum. A low, steady note from her healer's chants, once used to lull dying men into calm. The sound carried like warm breath over ice. The pyromancers joined, layering deeper thrums, weaving ancient vowels into the drone. Their voices trembled but did not break. Dragons overhead sensed the harmony. The strongest among them, a copper-scaled she-drake with half a wing torn, circled down and perched on a jagged spire. She eyed Nyra with slit gold pupils, flaring nostrils releasing bursts of steam. Nyra extended her cut palm, not offering blood this time, but invitation. The dragon's pupils widened. A gout of orange flame blossomed from her jaws, arcing over the circle to strike the ember shard.
Flame met shard met zand.
The obsidian powder flashed molten, streaming into the shard's crimson core. The lake convulsed, cracks spidered outward, venting jets of vapor bright as lightning. Nyra's song rose, soared, split into harmonics. Pyromancer's chants braided through hers. The copper drake roared, adding bass thunder. The ground leapt beneath their knees. From fissures burst pillars of magma, sharper and brighter than before the Night King's coming, livid veins of the earth's own blood rediscovered. They twisted skyward, shaping islands of new land in midair before crashing back as glowing boulders. Heat washed outward, thawing frost miles distant in moments. Steam clouded vision, ash-filled throats. Yet through the chaos, Nyra felt the stalled heartbeat quicken, then steady. The volcano lived. When at last the lake settled to a shimmering mirror, Nyra opened her eyes. The ember shard bobbed at its center. Molten glass fused around it like a lotus of living flame. The pyromancers collapsed, lungs scalded but joyous. Smiths paused, hammers half-raised, as warmth cascaded over them. A cheer rose, ragged, incredulous. For the first time since night walked across the sea, sunlit heat kissed Valyria's ruins. But heat breeds mirage, and in mirage hid death. The ex-Dryarch Joran crossed the thawing plain unseen amidst curtains of steam. Frost had cracked from his limbs, revealing flesh gray and hard as cured leather. The glaive he bore had absorbed heat until black crystal veins pulsed along its length. Each pulse cooled him, preserving undeath. He marched toward the basin, drawn by the ember's bright song. He was not first. Other revenants converged. A frost giant minus its legs, dragging itself by massive arms. A wyvern skeleton with ragged membrane stumps. Half a dozen ice thralls still wearing freehold armor. They did not coordinate, each moving along jagged lines like iron filings tugged by hidden magnets. Yet together they formed a wedge, an accidental phalanx, cresting the rim just as Nyra began guiding survivors into makeshift camps. Lorax spotted the wyvern first, a silhouette against white steam, then froze as its hollow screech shattered the air.
Niraspun.
The revenants descended in silence, broken only by bones sliding across glass. Joran's glaive cut 2 refugee smiths down before alarm fully rose. Their screams ended in frost-choked gasps as wounds froze mid-spurting. Dragons roared in scattered fury. The copper she-drake launched from her perch, but the wyvern skeleton intercepted, smashing into her flank with impossible momentum. They tumbled, copper wings shredding on the revenant's barbed ribs. The drake spat flame that licked bone, then guttered as ice reforged in its wake. Nyra ran toward the fight, ember shards glow reflecting in her eyes. Behind her, Arch-pyromancers struggled to stand, winded. Smiths brandished half-cooled blades meant for forge work, not battle. The revenants had struck at a moment of triumph. Terror threatened to snuff new hope like wind on candle. Joran advanced on Nyra. Frost smoke swirled around his broken helm as he hefted the glaive two-handed. His voice scraped free, a brittle whisper. No ember, only night. Nyra halted. Her mind raced. Without dragons, without prepared fire, how to shatter undeath? The ember shard pulsed at her belt, still fused to glass lotus fragments she had pried free. Fire and glass and blood had broken the Night King's spear. Perhaps it could break his spawn too, but she would need contact. She drew a shallow breath, tasting ash. You remember who you were? Joran's head tilted, as if parsing language through ice. Was. Ended. Night remains. But the night is gone, Nyra said, stepping nearer. Do you feel its pull? Or only emptiness? Joran twitched. The glaive's tip dipped a fraction. Steam parted between them, revealing the red shimmer at her waist. The Revenant's pupils narrowed like cracks sealing against light. He surged, glaive arcing. Nyra dropped, rolling beneath the swing. The blade sheared air where her head had been. She came up within arm's reach, tore the ember shard free, and slammed it against Joran's breastplate where frost crystal webbed across old Valyrian steel. The shard hissed deep crimson. Glass petals around it flared white. Heat burrowed through cracked metal, meeting bone turned to ice. Joran howled, a sound not of pain but of rupturing order. Blue light spilled from rents in his chest, battled red glare. For a heartbeat, the colors braided, indecisive. Then the ember brightened to molten gold. Ice shattered outward in spirals. The Revenant's torso caved inward, collapsing around the shard, which plunged through and burst from his back, trailing steam. Joran toppled, shuddered, lay still. Frost around him sublimated in a ring. The wyvern skeleton faltered mid-strike against the copper drake as whatever will animated it flickered. The giant dragging its bulk collapsed, stone dead. Thralls fell like puppets whose strings burned through. An instant later, each corpse dissolved. Ice first, then bone. Collapsing into puddles that steamed, then vanished, leaving only patches of thinning rime. Nyra sagged to her knees. Around her, survivors gaped. First in shock, then in wrenching relief. Some shouted prayers, others simply wept. Lorak stumbled to her side, collapsing beside Joran's melted armor. Is it truly done? He whispered. Nyra stared at the ember shard. Its glow had dimmed to a pulse barely brighter than cooling lava. I do not know, she said. The Night King is gone, but echoes may linger wherever he walked. We must be watchful. Lorak nodded, swallowing. Then his shoulders shook, laughter rising strange and brittle from his throat. Watchful, he repeated, as though savoring the novelty of a world in which vigilance, rather than terror, might matter again. Days passed, measured in slow circles of sun veiled behind steam. Valyria's survivors built shelters from fused glass slabs and obsidian beams, learning which cooled surfaces still held heat enough to forge nails. Dragons nested near vent mouths, basking in belches of restoring warmth. Nyra walked among encampments, easing burns with moonblossom salve, teaching smiths to grind obsidian into fine dust for new rituals of strengthening. She spoke little but listened much, Kalek. Ting grief and ambition both, as a healer gathers symptoms before prescribing a cure. One evening, as a salt breeze crept in from shores laid bare of ice, she climbed to the crest of a basalt cliff overlooking the peninsula's jagged silhouette. The copper drake, whom keepers now called Emberzong, perched beside her, tail curled around shattered statues. Together they watched the sun dip, turning steam clouds to rose and gold. For the first time, Nyra let herself believe the world might yet carry color. Footsteps approached. She turned to see Leaf, the child of the forest, stepping from the shadow of a twisted pillar. Nyra's breath caught. She had only felt the children's presence in dreams and tremors until now. Leaf's bark-brown skin glimmered with sap-like sweat, her eyes deep mossy pools. She bowed briefly, neither submissive nor hostile. "You have unbound what we forged," Leaf said, voice a flute-low rustle. "The knife of necessity is dull." Nyra searched that ancient face. "You wrought winter to end men's wars. You nearly ended the world." Leaf's gaze wandered across the steaming ruins. "Not ended, reset. Fire breeds conquest, we sought to turn it elsewhere. Yet fate slips like meltwater through roots." She touched the cliff stone, fingers faintly luminescent. "Now paths diverge again." Nyra shrugged weary shoulders. "You may still guide your people's path, but not by enslaving life to death. That road closes here." Leaf inclined her head, accepting reprimand. "We have paid cost. Roots severed, songs lost. The weirwoods bleed slow, but I come not to argue. I come to ask." She extended a tiny hand. "The ember you wield burns bright beyond flesh. Its memory can teach men and children both. Let us share its story, so war may not repeat." Nyra hesitated. The shard now rested in a fire hollow forged at the basin, Valyria's new heart. Granting the children access seemed risk and promise entangled. Yet she looked at Leaf, not victory-crowned but weary, sap-like tear trailing one cheek, and saw remorse seated with wisdom. "Not mine to grant," Nyra said. "This ember belongs to all who survived its making. Tomorrow I will summon as many voices as will come. Speak your plea there, and we will decide together." Leaf nodded. "So be the counsel." She stepped back into shadow, form thinning until moonlit steam swallowed her. Nyra exhaled, turning to Embersong, stroking the drake's warm neck. "5 hours," she murmured. "5 hours we fought to end a night that lasted minutes. Now comes the forever after." The dragon chuffed, flecks of flame dancing from nostrils. Nyra smiled thinly. Word of Valyria's near ruin spread faster than trade winds. Sailors from Volantis sighted unnatural auroras flickering over the smoking sea, azure veils crackling where none had shone before. Islands once charted as volcanic blackstone now glimmered white under frosted crusts. Carthane's spice barks returned coated in glassy rime despite southern currents. Every tale carried whispers of an Ember Queen who spoke to dragons and quenched a night made ice. In Westeros, maesters of the Citadel received ravens bearing shards of black crystal that steamed still. Their conclave pondered whether this signaled the final doom or an age reborn. North of the wall, the few remaining free folk watched auroras with hunted eyes, sensing a presence once felt from afar blink out, leaving hollows in the sky. Beyond the shivering sea, among labyrinthine ice caves, children listened to the wind and wept sap for kin lost in root songs severed. Across continents the world held breath, waiting to see whether Valyria, scarred but unbowed, would rise in fury or humility. No dragons darkened distant skies yet, but rumors claimed the Copper Queen, as sailors named Nyra sat astride Embersong atop the caldera at dawn, flame-red hair streaming like a standard. Some swore she bore a crown of fused glass. Others insisted she walked barefoot among refugees, feeding orphan children with stores conjured from ash. Whatever tales endured, one truth grew clear: power had tilted, not by sword, not by scepter, but by the heart song of a healer slave who carried both frost and fire in her veins. On the 20th morning after winter's retreat, Nyra convened council at the basin's rim. Survivors gathered. Smiths, priests, scholars, dragon riders, freed slaves, even a few bruised magisters who survived by crawling through molten gutters. Dragons circled overhead, their numbers thinned but resolute. Among twisted pylons the children arrived, Leaf and 3 others, pale as birch, eyes like star mirrors. No weapons, only silence thick with cross-centuries' pain. Nyra stood upon a dais of obsidian shaped by new magma flows. The ember shard pulsed behind her in its lotus pedestal, casting red-gold halos across faces below. She raised one hand, and voices dwindled. "You know me as slave, healer, singer," she began, voice steady though heart hammered. "But we gather not for titles. We gather to ask, what shall rise from these ruins?" She gestured to Leaf. Those who forged the Night King come to speak. They sought to turn fire from their forests and set it upon Valyria. Their aim failed. We stand in its wake. Murmurs crackled. Anger, fear, curiosity. Nyra lifted her palm for quiet. We may answer anger with more winter, more doom, or we may bind frost and flame to forge something else. Leaf stepped forward, small figure dwarfed by dais. Her voice carried uncanny clarity. Children once walked these lands long before men rode dragons. We sang to stone-shaped rivers. When first men cut forests, we bled. We birthed cold to defend. Cold grew hungrier than grief. We chained it, buried sorrow. Yet need returned. We tried again, and again fate turned. Her gaze swept survivors. We see now path of revenge circles only to more tears. So we come to bend route toward sun, if sun will have us. Silence followed, heavy. One magister spat. Son, you froze our children into statues. You would lecture us on mercy. Leaf bowed her head. I would listen. I would repay with seed and song. The smith, missing 2 fingers, once frostbitten, stepped forward. Song won't rebuild towers or feed bellies. Nyra answered, but song can teach stone to bear crops in ashen soil, can coax dragons to lend flame where forges died. We need both craft and chant. Debate erupted, shouted grievances, arguments of reparations, cries for punishment. Nyra let them rage, listening. Only when voices cracked to weary hush did she speak again. You cannot rebuild by dividing ash from ember. Fire alone conquers, frost alone preserves. Together they temper steel. She pointed at the lotus pedestal. This ember chose none. It lives because flame and ice met blood. So must we. She drew a small obsidian blade, pricked her palm, let blood fall into a shallow bowl. Then she held the blade out. Lorak stepped up, slicing his finger, letting blood join hers. Embersong's rider, a scarred woman named Valyria, added a drop. Leaf stepped beside them, pressed sap-laden fingertip to shard edge. Pale green fluid dripped into the bowl, mingling without hiss or smoke. The smith followed, then the magister, then one of the freed slaves. A dozen more joined until the bowl shimmered with swirling red and green. Nyra raised it. By blood shared, we bind to rebuild. Not child's pact, not Dragonlord's covenant. A vow of life after night. She poured the mingled liquid onto the glass beneath her feet. It soaked in, leaving a faint iridescent stain. The ember behind her brightened, as if acknowledging the offering. A hush deeper than earlier descended. People looked at one another, strangers bound by catastrophe, wondering what shape such a vow would take. At last Lorak spoke, voice hoarse but clear. We will form a council of many hands. Smith and seer, dragon and child, slave and lord. Each shall hold one scale of the future. This freehold of old is gone. A new flame must be named. Murmurs warmed into assent. The priestess who had sung at the lake smiled through tears. Leaf placed a tiny wooden charm at the dais' base. A weirwood leaf carved in living bark. Nyra felt a loosening in her chest, long drawn tight by battle. They had not chosen vengeance, but possibility. She turned her gaze northward, beyond steaming seas toward continents unaware of dawn's bargain. Let word fly wide, she said. Tell them Valyria lives, not as conqueror but as crucible. Fire tempered by frost. Let any who would share rebuilding bring their gifts. And let those who carry only swords weigh them against dragons newly risen. Her words carried on thermal winds. Dragons answered with a chorus of roars. Some raw, some triumphant, all laced with beginnings. Night fell gentle. Stars glittered through thinning steam. Nyra stood at the basin's rim alone. Embersong curled nearby like a living furnace. The ember shard pulsed steady now, neither waning nor waxing, its balance found. Leaf emerged from shadow. Your counsel is beginning of long road. Long roads are built one step, Nyra replied, smiling faintly. And sometimes they need roots as well as stones. Leaf nodded. Where roots grow, song will follow. She placed a small seed pod in Nyra's hand. "Plant at dawn in ash near fire. It will bloom silver leaves to cool hot days. A gift." Nyra closed her fingers around it. "Thank you." Leaf's eyes glimmered. "And thank you, Ember Bearer." She melted once more into darkness. Nyra looked skyward. A thin ribbon of green light writhed across stars, remnant of aurora. She felt both chill and warmth in its glow, as though the world still negotiated between extremes. She breathed deep and tasted promise. In time, scholars would name that night the first of the Forged Age. They would teach how frost and flame birthed blended arts, steel that sang healing to wounds, glass that cooled famine-stricken fields, and how dragons carried seedlings to corners of earth barren since the breaking. They would argue whether the children guided counsel from shadows or walked openly among new cities of obsidian spires wreathed in living vines. They would debate whether the Night King's echo still lurked in polar wastes, waiting another misstep. But all would agree that the hinge of history had turned on a healer's courage and a shard's living fire. For now, Nyra simply sat beside her dragon and watched embers stir within distant vents, painting the horizon gold. She pressed the seed pod to her heart and closed her eyes, dreaming roots that would outlive her name. Somewhere beneath the basalt, magma rumbled like laughter, and frost replied with a sigh. In their harmony, she heard the slow forging of dawn. The hush breathed on, but now it sounded unmistakably like hope. Wind carried the mingled sense of salt, smoke, and newborn greenery across the caldera as the 41st dawn after the Night King's fall unfurled pale gold ribbons across the horizon. The basin, once blackened by slag, now shimmered with veins of tempering glass and veins of softly glowing moss, a delicate weave of heat-forged earth and frost-fed life. Between the cooling vent mouths, scaffolds of obsidian timber rose like half-formed ribs. Smiths had melted broken tower stones in rope-suspended braziers, then poured the molten slurry into hinge molds shaped by the children's own spiral glyphs. The result was a skeleton city, every beam streaked red-orange where living fire coursed through capillaries of crystal, every joint socketed with white-veined permafrost that drank excess heat and turned it into cooling mist. Valyria rebuilt itself the way a wounded dragon knits bone. Slowly, hungrily, and with a beauty equal parts terrible and tender. Nyra woke on the lip of the main vent, where the copper drake Emberzong slept coiled in a circle of her own steam. The dragon's cracked wing, once in tatters, glistened with new membranes, translucent sheets that rippled amber whenever her heart pumped fire through freshly grown veins. Nyra had slept little, her dreams tangled with voices that spoke in leaf-hushed rustles and hammer clangs, with distant sea songs of unknown fleets riding cautious currents toward this half-ruined paradise. She rose barefoot, felt the stone warm beneath her soles, and watched sparks drift skyward from the forge braziers like insects courting dawn. Each spark was a vow, she told herself, a promise that what had been broken might yet sing again. Below, the council's half-circle ringed the lake of new glass. Lorak, scholar turned steward, paced beside a pair of giant obsidian tablets on which he had etched the first draft of the accord. 38 clauses hammered out through days of shouting and nights of healing wine. Beside him stood the smith Rhaego Caro, his frost-scarred fingers now wrapped in silverleaf poultices, and the priestess Anise Herkun, black hair braided with slivers of weirwood bark gifted by Leaf. On the outer arc waited the children's delegation. Leaf herself and two who called themselves Ash Under Moon and Breath Between Roots, names that sounded like water trickling through caverns of time. They stood small among the towering stone, but the hush that followed their every movement gave them gravity no throne could grant. Nyra descended a spiral of fused glass steps and took her place at Lorak's side. The council bowed heads, not in obeisance but in acknowledgement of the Emberbearer's role, fulcrum rather than crown. She nodded in return, eyes sweeping the gathering. Dragon riders still in soot-scarred leathers. Freed smith slaves now called Iron Wives, for they had taken vows to marry hammer and tongs instead of chains. Emissaries from the Summer Isles whose arrival the day before had startled half the camp. Dusky-skinned sailors bearing casks of sweet water to heal scorched throats, and scrolls lined with trade promises written in neat Valyrian runes. Hope, it seemed, was learning to walk upon cautious feet. Lorak tapped the first tablet with a chalkbone stylus. Clause 10, he announced, voice raspier since smoke had scarred his lungs. The levy of dragons. By this measure, no winged beast may henceforth be bound to chain or iron collar. Each rider shall swear to treat their mount as partner, not property, and any violation. Rhaego Caro raised his scarred stump where 2 fingers once lived. And who judges violation? A smith from the Iron Wives cannot match a dragon lord's word in old courts. Because the old courts are dead, Nyra answered, calm but sharp. Our tribunal will draw 3 voices: craft, faith, and root. Smiths speak for craft, priests for faith, and the children for root. Rider or not, that balance holds. Ashundermoon's leaf-thin lips curled at the corners, ambiguous as dawn. Roots remember, she said, voice like snowmelt. We will judge with memory older than any law stone. A rumble echoed overhead. 2 young dragons raced across the caldera sky, looping each other in playful dogfights. Their wing beats thundered like drum rolls, sending quivers through half-formed spires. Anise Herkun watched them with reverence and dread intertwined. See how free wings may yet bring ruin if their riders lose caution, she murmured. But chains breed only resentment. The council tapped stylus to tablet, marking consensus. Clause 10 stood. Nyra lifted her gaze to the horizon. Sea fog clung low, tinted copper by rising sun. Somewhere beyond that haze, sails approached. She felt them in the ember's pulse, distant nerves quivering. Westerosi, perhaps, drawn by rumor of dragons revived, or Volantine war-triers, smelling weakness. She motioned to Lorak, who flipped the tablet to Clause 18, the welcome of guests. Before they began debate, a horn blast trumpeted from the eastward watchtower, a single hollow note that reverberated through half-finished streets. The tongues of the Flameskipper Watch had not yet learned Valyrian, but worry needed no translation. Visitors had come sooner than augury predicted. Embersong's head snapped up, copper crest flaring. A low growl thundered in her chest, sending ripples of steam through the basin. Dragons along the perches answered with uneasy churs. Nyra felt tension tighten the air like a drawn bow. Time to test your fresh clauses, steward, she said. A skirl of wind scattered fog, revealing 3 ships riding glass-green swells. They flew the twin nobility banners of Lys and Volantis. Golden Trident on Aquamarine for the Lyseni Free Captains League, Black Tiger and Red Flame for House Malar of Volantis. Not warships. Sleek couriers with narrow keels and lateen sails, but swift enough to outrun dragons if given distance. They anchored in the shallow bay where frost still floated in jagged slabs, and lowered longboats crewed by sailors in silks that once would have turned greedy eyes. Now silks looked foolish beside the scorched armor of Valyria's defenders. Nyra, Lorak, and Leaf walked to meet them. Embersong shadowed overhead, orbiting with lazy circles, a reminder carved in living copper. At the water's edge, the Lyseni envoy stepped onto a rock shelf, a tall woman with violet eyes and laughter dimples, though her lips were set to no mirth now. She bowed from the waist. I am Mara Tessarian, chosen mouth of the free captains, she called. We bring condolences and offers. The Volantine representative, a hawk-nosed man in plume-tipped helm, clambered up beside her. Archon Palos Malar offers likewise, he said, voice oiled smooth, and demands nothing, merely audience. Audience granted, Lorak replied, though his shoulders tautened. Mara's violet eyes shifted to Leaf, curiosity sparking. I see legends walk in your shadow. Then the rumors speak true. Frost children and dragons dine together. Rumors report only what eyes allow, Nyra answered. Speak your offers. Mara produced a scroll sealed in molten blue wax. Grain, timber for 100 masons, and the loan of 2 dry dock hullsmiths. In exchange, rights to dock in any Valyrian port without tariff for 10 cycles of the moon, and safe passage for our spice runners beyond Cape Wrath. Volantis's envoy barked a practiced laugh. Small gifts for grand concessions, he scoffed. The Tiger Throne proposes shipment of 3,000 slave engineers, 40 siege cranes, and enough bronze fittings to rebuild your collapsed bridges in half the time. He unfurled his parchment, ink still fresh. In return, a modest lease, 50 dragon eggs yet unhatched, to be chosen by our own assessors, plus right of first refusal on any additional clutch for 100 years. Lorak nearly choked. You would breed dragons like cattle? The envoy lifted shoulders. Better stable dragons than wild ones burning trade lanes. Nyra felt Embersong's shadow pass over her, wing beats stirring salt hair across her cheeks. Better free dragons than enslaved men, she said. Valyria will not barter life for bronze. Volantis's man stiffened. We offer strength where you are weak. Refugee camps starve within sight of magma rivers. Accept and live, or cling to pride and perish. He glanced at Mera, as though expecting united front. But the Lyseni envoy's gaze lingered on leaf-carved buildings, on dragons sunning themselves near vents, on children guiding vines up fresh pillars. Hunger lit behind her eyes, but not solely for profit, perhaps for wonder. Mera bowed again. The free captains will revise terms, she said simply. We see new fires burn here, fires that may light more than gold. Volantis's envoy flushed. Fanciful nonsense. Dragons are weapons. Sentiment will not feed a city. Nyra stepped forward, palm resting on emberwarm dagger at her belt. Son of the Shard, forged 3 nights ago in ceremonial flames. Apon or wonder is choice of hand-wielding, she said. Look, she beckoned Leaf, who drew from her satchel a handful of silver seeds. She scattered them at the envoy's feet where black sand met melted glass. Instantly shoots unfurled, leaves shimmering like nacre, roots cracking stone to draw warmth. In heartbeats the sprouts reached knee-height, each leaf exhaling cool perfume of pine and fresh rain. Steam eddied around them, turning dew into rainbow shards. Those trees will bear fruit within 10 sun cycles, Leaf whispered. 1 fruit feeds 3 hungry men. 1 root heals ashlung. 1 leaf cools fever of molten glass workers. No chains required. Mera inhaled sharply. The envoy from Volantis took half a step back. Nyra's voice softened. Trade with us in mutual aid, or trade not at all. Dragons may choose to scorch fleets, but they would rather shepherd skies. We decide which future with every bargain signed. Silence stretched, broken only by distant hammer clang and Embersong's throaty hum. Mera inclined her head. I will convey new vision to the captains, she said. She turned to Volantis's man. Perhaps you might carry more than demands to your Archon. He sputtered, but Nyra cut in. Carry this as well. She produced a glass ampoule containing a sliver of frozen blue ice, relic of Night King's fading echo, and a grain of emberfire sealed beside it. Tell him frost and flame fused saved Valyria. They do not coexist in cage. They balance. The envoy accepted with trembling fingers, gaze darting from shard to trees cascading dew across his polished boots. Something like fear or awe creased his brow. He bowed stiffly, retreating. When both envoys departed with escorts, Lorak exhaled. We've made no enemies yet, he said, but also no allies. Nyra watched the Lyseni sail hoist and catch wind. We've sown seeds. They may sprout slower than dragons fly, but roots hold better than chains. Leaf smiled small and sad. Roots remember, she echoed. That night a storm gathered, not from cloud but from ideological collision. A faction calling itself the Scorched Ward rose among remaining high-blood dragon lords, those who lost kin to Frost and now feared further dilution of ancestral power. They gathered in a broken arena carved into the caldera rim, its viewing tiers still splattered with glassy ash. At their head stood Valerio Valaros, silver hair matted, eyes sunken hollows of grief. His dragon, Ashfire, had died the day the Night King breached the sky, and Valaros wore a pendant of the beast's final scale pressed to his heart like a wound that would not scab. We rebuild a city of beggars and monsters, Valerio hissed to the circle of torches. Children from fairy tales whisper in our laws. Slaves name us equal. Foreigners smell weakness and come to pluck egg from cradle. He raised a shard of Valyrian's broken Fong, salvaged from the cooled lake. I say, reclaim destiny, bind all dragons, cull each frost seed, drive the children back to haunted woods. Then let the world tremble as once it did. Murmurs thrummed, some nods, some shaken heads, but fire of fear can spread faster than reason. Valaros spoke of purity, of divine right, of debts the world owed Valyria's blood. His words cracked hearts still half-clotted with grief. By torchlight they clasped wrists, forging silent pact to seize hatching grounds at dawn and overawe the fledgling council. 20 riders with eggs still viable would march on the ember pedestal, claim the shard, and burn any who resisted. But one torchbearer slipped into shadow before vows sealed. Saran Mithray, cousin to Valaros, had lost 2 daughters to falling ice spires, yet had seen Nyra tend his wife's fever until Moonblossom and Silverleaf coaxed breath back. He ran through maze of scaffold streets to the basin's vent, breath tearing his chest. Embersong's watchers halted him, spears crossing before ramp, but he shouted warning until Nyra emerged, hair a dark river in lamplight. Within moments the council convened in whispering. Debate sparked hot. Some urged preemptive strike, dragons unleashed. Others argued parley, still more panicked at thought of family caged again. Nyra listened, letting fury of voices swirl until exhaustion thinned them, then spoke. Purity is a comfort to those afraid of change, she said, but we are change embodied. We answer not with blades but with truth they cannot ignore. She turned to Leaf. Is the seed wall ready? Leaf nodded. Roots wound tight around molten fissures, waiting song. Then we invite our brothers to witness dawn. The scorched ward rode at first light through lanes still crusted with dewfrost, banners of smolder orange trailing behind. They expected resistance, clashing towers, Ember's pit ballistae repurposed, but city felt silent, empty. At basin entrance they drew rein. Embers glowed low, yet no guard lines barred path. The pedestal shimmered at center, ember shard pulsing slow. Valaros sneered. Too easy. He dismounted, ordering riders to circle. As boots clanged across glass, Nyra stepped from behind a pillar. Alone, unarmed save Daggerleaf at belt. Her silence unsettled half the ward, but Valaros strode forward. Move aside, Ember Witch, he snarled. Your miracle ends today. He lifted Valyrian's Fong like a crude mace. We claim what is ours. Nyra gestured to Shard. Take it, then. If it is only fire you crave, fire will oblige. Confusion flickered at her calm, but greed snuffed doubt. Valaros advanced, teeth bared. Pedestal's edge he reached, then paused. The glass around Shard pulsed faint green beneath red. He scoffed, seized it. Molten heat lanced his palm. He hissed yet held on, determined. But beneath fingers glass flexed, stretching like sap rather than shattering. Roots of silverleaf vines erupted from pedestal base, wrapping his wrist, blooming leaves that glowed amber. He yanked back. Vines held. Cries rose as roots shot across floor, unfurling net that shimmered with heat and frost at once. Ward horses reared. Riders cursed. Nyra spoke, voice low but ringing in sudden hush. This city's heart beats with more than flame. Firesmith root song entwined. Strike against one, the other will tame you. Valaros struggled. Vines wrapped torso, legs, fusing Fong to pedestal. Heat climbed arm, but frost from vines cooled flesh, trapping nervous system between agony and numbness. Sweat and frost glittered on his brow. He glared. Witchcraft. Collaboration, Nyra corrected. See, she raised her palm. Vines relaxed, uncoiled, leaving only thin fluted scars on Valaros's wrist. Fong clattered to floor. He stumbled back, fear fracturing rage. Ward riders watched, spellbound. None loosed blade. Nyra crouched, retrieved Fong. It had cooled to dull gray, stripped of dragonfire memory by contact with roots. A weapon is as strong as bond between maker and bearer, she said, returning Fong in open hand. Take it. Use it to build, not break. Or try again to break, and root will drink your heat permanently. Silence. Valaros stared at Fong, then at Nyra's steady gaze. The world seemed to tilt. Something cracked in his face, not bone but certainty. Slowly he sank to knee, head bent. One by one, ward riders dismounted, kneeling. A morning breeze rustled vines, carrying scent of pine and ash, merging. That day scorched ward dissolved, its members swearing to the accord. Valaros became first commander of the Skyseed cadres. Dragon riders pledged to plant Silverleaf from saddle wherever they flew. His oath read simply, "Wing and root, one breath." As seasons turned, the forged age unfolded. Silverleaf groves sprang along Valyrian roads. Their blossoms soothed throat scald and filtered smoke from air. Dragons, unchained, learned shared songs taught by children. They carried seed pods in scale pouches, dropping them over ravaged farms far beyond peninsula. Ships from Lys returned bearing grain and limewood, paying low tariffs in craftwork rather than coin. Volantis, after years of internal strife, sent a delegation stripped of slave chains and bearing charters promising emancipation of 300 artisans in exchange for dragonglass trade secrets. Yet not all corners of the world bent toward light. In the northernmost wastes beyond the shivering sea, where fragments of Night King's dominion still simmered beneath aurora veils, a murmuring stirred. Hunters found tracks of ice elk whose bodies shed flakes that burned cold. Fishermen hauled nets of ghost pike whose eyes glowed sapphire. Something remnant, searching. Maesters recorded these signs, sending ravens to Valyria requesting counsel. Frost without master, perhaps seeking new will. Nyra read letters in council chamber of living glass and felt ember throb uneasily. "We broke spear but left shards," she told Leaf. "Shards may gather dust, or gather each other." Leaf's bark-brown brow furrowed. "Roots stretch far north. I will send dreamers to listen." Dreamers went. Children curled in hollowed ice caverns, sipping sap and memory. They tasted whispers of identity searching for shape. No single will, but many fragments yearning to fuse. They dreamed pale faces forming from drifting snow only to melt at dawn, leaving echoes that cursed the sun. They returned, voices quavering. "Echo seeks anchor," they said. "If anchor found, night will weave new skin." Council debated response. Some cried for dragonflame preemptive to scour argent wastes. Others cautioned humility. The Night King's second birth had been catalyzed by fear of men. Repeating cycle might forge third, worse. Nyra weighed arguments, fingers tracing root-veined glass. She recalled Valaros's kneeling, how fear had turned to wonder when offered choice not chains, and wondered if Frost Echoes too might choose. Thus she proposed journey. "Take a cadre of willing dragons," she told Valara, Embersong's rider, now sworn Sky Seed. "Carry not flame alone but seed and shard dust. Offer Echo anchor of life, not death. Show Frost we learned harmony." Valara's eyes widened. Risk smelled bigger than drake wings, yet she nodded. "If Frost hungers for meaning, we feed with possibility." They prepared. Forge masters ground flakes of ember-touched crystal into powder. Children blessed pouches of dream dust. Silverleaf seeds braided into dragon harnesses. Valara mounted Embersong, now fully healed and broader of chest. For other dragons joined, each bearing rider who once knelt in fear but now stood in covenant. They launched under crimson sunset, wings beating hope into darkening sky. Nyra stood upon highest spire, watching until shadows swallowed silhouettes. She pressed palm to pedestal, feeling embers pulse echo heartbeat across fused city. "Wing and root," she whispered. "One breath." Hammers rang behind her, forging fittings for first wind gondola to carry healers north if call came. In courtyards children chased fireflies that glowed azure, stray sparks of frost flame alchemy drifting from workshops, their laughter braided with smith choruses. She closed eyes and let world's new song wash over. Part roar, part whisper, all becoming. Far west across the narrow sea, Dragonstone sky blazed with unnatural aurora. Lady Rhaenys of House Targaryen stood upon windswept battlements, fingers buried in her dragon Meliora's warm neck, watching green and violet curtains ripple. Maesters pored over scrolls, whispering of Valyria's rebirth and children of winter. The small folk spoke of omen. Dragons shall cross storm again. But Rhaenys found herself wondering less about war, more about song. She had dreamed of silver leaves and copper wings, of a healer's gentle hands. Perhaps the world's axis had shifted. Perhaps dragons could become gardeners of fate rather than harbingers of firestorm. She resolved to sail, not with an army but a gift. Casks of gullet pearls to seed new reefs where frost had starved seas. Thus currents carried her vow south and east. Thus alliances unimagined a year before bent toward forging things together rather than fracturing them apart. And thus the Night King's echo, adrift in gloom, felt stirrings of warmth brush its edges, foreign, disquieting, offering shape if chosen. In the hush of polar aurora, shards of once was listened. Valara's cadre broke cloud ceiling above white waste weeks later, drawn by hiss of phantom wind across ice plains. There they saw shapes coalescing, towers of hoarfrost in infant silhouettes, trying to imitate living forms but collapsing as flakes lost cohesion. Embersongs circled, breathed soft cone of balanced flame, half blue, half red, melting towers into pools that sprouted root vines upon contact with silverleaf seeds rained from saddlebags. The frost pools steamed, then crusted, then blossomed with tiny white flowers that sang faint chime notes in the cold. And in each flower's bell, Valyria swore she glimpsed sparks of sapphire becoming gold before winking out, undecided. She landed, dismounted, approached the nearest pool. The echo within stirred. She knelt, uncapped pouch of ember dust, poured pinch into water. Heat rippled, frost hissed. Vapor coiled into twisting whirl. Within whirl hovered visage like shattered mirror collecting itself. No malice, only yearning. Valyria spoke first word taught by children, ache. Second word, mend. The whirl pulsed. Color bled from blue to lavender. She answered with name, second dawn. Offered palm. The mist touched skin, cold that did not bite. Ember dust glimmered along edges of formless will, giving definition. A hand-like curl, ghostly digits brushing her scarred knuckles. Above, Embersong trumpeted, note not of danger but greeting. Other dragons echoed. Aurora intensified, streaking sky with tigers of rose and jade. At horizon, the glacial night lightened from black to soft silver, as though some unseen sun considered rising well before its accustomed hour. Valyria closed eyes, murmured covenant. Wing and root, frost and flame, one breath. Back in Valyria, Nyra felt Ember Spike's sudden warmth, a lover's heartbeat through stone. She smiled, knowing no battle cry followed. Instead, heat settled into steady thrum, world exhaling. She strode through streets where children taught masons to carve runes that coaxed vines into weight-bearing arches, where smiths quenching blades in silverleaf oil produced edges that refused to dull. She visited infirmary domes cooled by frost-chilled conduits, watching burn victims heal with no scar. At each threshold, people greeted her not as queen but as ember-bearer, equal among many sparks. That evening she climbed again to high spire, Embersong's perch awaiting empty but warm. Stars emerged, no longer dim behind steam. She opened palm. Seed from leaf rested there, sprouted days ago in hidden alcove. Its silver stalk now bore a cluster of pale blue blooms that chimed in breeze. She kissed petals, set pot on ledge, watched starlight dance on glass city. 5 hours to end night, she whispered, recalling that first crucible. A lifetime to tend dawn. Behind her, counselors drafted next clauses. Rights of riverfolk, codices on dream-sharing rituals, guidelines for fostering hatchlings with families of all bloods. Their quills scratched patient as root through stone. And somewhere north, frost echoed those strokes, shaping first letters of its own new song. Dawn would come again and again, sometimes with fire, sometimes with ice. Yet in Valyria's heart a single shard glowed, balanced, reminding all who gathered. Harmony is forged, not found, tempered in crisis, cooled in compassion. sharpened by shared resolve. Night might return, but should it rise, it would rise to meet a chorus of wing and root, flame and frost fused in unbroken breath. Midsummer's first moon lifted over the smoking sea like a tarnished coin, its glow half swallowed by vapors that still rose from vents newly tamed but never sleeping. In the hush between hammer shifts, Nyra walked the skybridge that joined two half-finished spires above the caldera. Copper railings radiated warmth against her fingers. Silverleaf vines twined along every joint, their night bloom petals chiming faintly in the salt wind. Below, scaffolds flickered with embers as wardens banked the forge fires for rest. The city's heartbeat had slowed to a deep, even murmur, but she felt another rhythm tugging at the edges of thought, distant yet insistent. Valyria's bond call winging south across 1,000 leagues of ice and cloud. She reached the bridge's center and leaned into the breeze. From her satchel, she drew a shell of pale opal, a gift from the Summer Isle's envoy. Inside lay a dusting of aurora-charged powder distilled from the shards Valyria carried north. Nyra tipped a single pinch into her palm, whispered wing and root, one breath, and released it to the wind. The specks ascended, caught moonlight, and scattered like reverse meteors toward the pole star. An instant later, the ember deep beneath the city's vent flared, answering. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, Embersong would feel the pulse thrum through harness ribs and know her mistress listened. The reply came in ripples of color across the northern sky, aurora ribbons widening, then pinching to a single spear of white that stabbed down the curve of the world. Nyra's heart skipped, a promise, but also a warning. She turned to descend, already calling through the weir web to Leaf, to Lorak, to the air riders who served as the Accord's swift messengers. Council would meet before dawn. They gathered in the Hall of Joining, once a slag-filled arena, now a chamber whose columns were living trunks of fused silverleaf and obsidian. A central hearth, an eye of liquid glass, cast soft amber light across the faces assembled. Artisans coated in soot, priestesses wearing star-wrought veils, riders still smelling of dragon sweat, children whose moss-dark eyes reflected flame as distant suns. Valyria's message played inside the hearth, a looping mirage woven by dream dust and ember shards. It showed white plains under green sky, dragons stooping to land beside pools of radiant frost water. It showed mist forms reaching toward outstretched human hands, coalescing, then fracturing before shape could settle. It ended with Valyria's voice, breathless. They seek anchor. We offer names. They are undecided. Yet one moment they echo warmth. The next they recoil, bearing hunger like memory. We will stay and sing the harmonies, but we risk becoming mirrors for their longing. Send us counsel. Send light to keep our shapes our own. When the image dissolved, silence nested in the rafters. Nyra felt eyes turn to her, but she deferred first to Leaf. The child's bark-skinned cheeks glimmered with sap tears. Echo yearns for pattern, Leaf said, voice as soft as roots threading loam. But Frost's oldest pattern is still chain and spear. If we feed that memory more than the new song, it may knit into armor again. We must teach them gentle order, else they clothe themselves in the cold of conquest. Rhaego Caro scratched his beard, frost-scarred fingers clicking. Gentle orders no shield if Echo chooses blades. We should ready dragons. Across the circle, Valaros, once leader of the Scorched Ward, now captain of Skyseed cadres, nodded. Aye, but not with talons bared. Flight of guardians, not executioners. Show power yoked to healing. Lorak tapped his stylus on a slate. We possess knowledge of pattern-binding runes the children shared. If inscribed on glass and frost together, they might stabilize the echo's forming shapes. We could dispatch a craft coterie with etched sigils. Debate blossomed. Supply lines through storms, risk of escort provoking fear, the politics of appearing weak to newly respectful trading partners. Nyra listened, eyeing each worry like molten or, then raised her hand. We will send 3 missives, she concluded. First, a phalanx of Skyseed riders bearing sigil glass and twilight looms to weave the binding patterns. Second, a delegation of Summer Isle lamplighters. They carry songs that tame winds, The echo may favor new music no side has yet voiced. Third me, the chamber erupted, protest, astonishment, admiration. Nyra let it wash over until the waves calmed. I am Ember-bearer, she said when quiet clung again. The shard's pulse reaches them through me most clearly. If we wish to anchor frost to harmony, I must stand in the circle. Leaf's small fingertips brushed Nyra's wrist. The ember can warm or burn. Take care you do not glow so bright that echo melts to nothing, or sets you aflame. Nyra smiled, tired. I do not go alone. Flame and root entwine. Preparations consumed 2 days. They forged Talon light sleds fitted beneath dragon saddles, each strung with latticework of sigil glass. Thin panes etched in copper and obsidian dust that shimmered when fire or frost brushed them. Lamplighters arrived on swift catamarans, carrying spiraled horns carved from sea drake bones. When sounded, the horns produced chords that countered polar crosswinds. Children shaped dream-woven nets to catch stray shards of echo should they stray toward dissonance. On dawn of departure, Nyra donned a mantle spun from copper wire feathers, each tipped with silver-leaf filament. Embersong crouched on the eastern launch pier, eyes alight with restless anticipation. Valaros mounted the jade-spotted male Tyrolas. 2 other riders joined them. Saran Mithray, former torchbearer turned oathforger, and Anise Herkun, priestess now bonded to a pale gold she-drake named Lightloom. 12 lamplighters took positions on the saddle's rear platforms, instruments secured in whale leather sacks. 3 children rode as well, nestled inside root cocoons strapped along the dragon's spines. Their small forms glowed faint where sap veins carried pulse of the weirweb. Spectators thronged the bridges, singing wordless harmonies that mingled with the dragon's heartbeats. As Embersong's wings unfurled, Nyra heard the city breathing through them, iron lungs exhaling possibility. They climbed into bruised violet sky, leaving Valyria a cluster of embering constellations behind. At altitude, the lamplighters unlocked their horns, pouring low notes into the slipstream. The sound braided around the travelers, a cocoon of resonance that kept air smooth. Dragons beat northward, sails of copper, jade, and gold-slicing clouds tinted by dawn. Day lengthened into luminous plain, sun riding low along right horizon. Far below, flecks of shattered volcanic islands glittered like dragon scales on black silk sea. Night fell quick in those latitudes. Stars burst, auroras unfurled. The horn music shifted to minor modes, guiding course between storm fronts swirling miles beneath. 2 nights and a day they flew, resting on drifting icebergs warmed by dragonbelly steam. On the 3rd dusk, the polar desert appeared, a continent of alabaster undulations, horizon fogged by diamond dust. Valara's beacon, columns of prismatic light, danced above a basin where ice warped into mirror-like domes encircling an open plain. Embarkation became hush. Lamplighters tightened harness webbing. Children pressed palms to glass seed pods, coaxing them awake. Nyra felt ember inside her breast flare brighter at proximity. Like 2 halves of a magnet nearing reunion, they spiraled down. Snow devils scattered. Frostpool mirrors rippled. Valara and her riders emerged from a grove of silverleaf frost hybrids, trees with trunks of translucent blue ice and leaves of gleaming tin. She raised a hand in greeting, but her eyes showed sleepless nights, joy braided with unease. When feet touched ice-hardened ground, the air turned startlingly still, sound deadened, as though world inhaled and held breath. Frost mists gathered, coiling into wispy tendrils that crept toward the newcomers, pausing inches from warm boots, exploring with hesitant flicks like blind kittens. Nyra knelt, opened her clenched fist. Inside lay a grain of glass engraved with the sigil of joining, a circle bound by twin serpents, one of flame, one of root. She placed it on the ice. Tendrils converged, wove around it. Frost melted into liquid silver, which refroze in new pattern, mirroring the sigil but adding a 3rd serpent of pale blue, head unformed. Nyra exhaled. They had come in peace, and Echo replied in kind, yet its language remained half-invented. They camped beside Valara's expedition dome, a structure of dragonbone spars and translucent vine leaves that, when breathed upon by Embersong's gentle flame, glowed warm as hearthstones. Night inside the dome pulsed with shifting colors, auroras refracted through frost arches overhead. Nyra poured mead boiled with summer spices, sharing cups with lamplighters and children. They spoke quietly about first contact. Valyria described days of patience, singing coils of root-wind lullabies, shaping sigil patterns across pools, watching echo swirl close then tear away as though startled by its own reflection. "It feels like talking to water," she confessed. "You see a face, but touch it and ripples hide the lines." Leaf listened, then responded, "Water seeks any vessel, offer shape without grip." She produced a bundle of slender crystal needles, each etched with runes that directed energy to flow in spirals, not straight lines. "We weave these into nets stretched between dragons in flight. Echo may drift through, trace the lines, learn its edges." Valaros frowned. "And if Echo uses those lines to build new weapons?" Nyra met his gaze. "Then we teach use by example. What we forge alongside them." At first light, the sky a washed-out canvas streaked with salmon and jade. They assembled on the ice plain. 5 dragons formed a circle airborne, gliding slow on thermals coaxed by lamplighter horns. Between them unfurled the crystal net, gossamer strands catching dawn beams, refracting into rainbows that painted the riders' faces. On ground below, children positioned sigil glass mirrors, angling them so any wind would carry light upward into the net, turning strands into rivers of shifting color. Nyra and Valyria stood at the nexus, flanked by Leaf. They began the song of joining, low hum built from heartbeat tempo, layered with lamplighters' minor chords, blended with dragon's rumble. Sound shimmered up, danced along crystal threads. Frost mist stirred, rising like breath from a sleeping colossus. It drifted into lattice gaps, trailing tendrils curiously along rune grooves. At first the mist simply glowed where threads touched, like dew kissed by sunrise. Then shapes budded. A fingertip, an eyelid, suggestions of spine. They blurred, coalesced, collapsed, regrew. Each iteration lasted seconds longer than last. Nyra felt ember race inside her veins, synchronizing rhythm with Echo's attempt. She stepped forward, palm up. A pseudopod of shimmering haze reached from the nearest node, stopped hairbreadth short. She whispered her own name, not as label but as melody, the sequence of breaths her mother had once sung soothing fevers. Echo answered with chord of wind across distant hollows, mimic of her cadence. She smiled. Leaf released a seed pod into the drift. It unfurled silver leaves mid-air, roots seeking nothingness. Echo enveloped it, ice tendrils weaving through roots, etching new crystalline veins in bark. The seed did not freeze. Instead it glowed, half ice, half chlorophyll. Another minute passed. The glowing seed sprouted a second shoot made purely of frost, translucent reeds waving in breeze, mirroring real leaves like a ghost twin. Valyria laughed, tears of cold on her lashes. "They garden," she breathed, but harmony trembled. A distant boom echoed across plain, ice shelf calving into sea. Dragons startled. Nets sagged. Frost forms quivered, shapes collapsing into amorphous cloud. Within that cloud blue sparks flared, reminiscent of the Night King's first breath. Nyra's pulse surged. Ember sought to flare defensive. She fought instinct, steadied breath, crooned lullaby note. Sparks flickered uncertain, dimmed. Mist restabilized, but now a new edge manifested, jagged, shard-like, reminiscent of spear tip. Echo had tasted fear and mirrored it. Leaf's voice threaded the comms. "Offer counterpart, soften blade with root." Nyra signaled lamplighters. They shifted tune to major sixths, chords of sunrise on calm tide. Dragons answered with softer growls. Saren Mithray loosed a packet of powdered ember dust and silverleaf pollen, letting breeze carry it. The mix drifted upward, frosting spear edge in gold film. Spear softened, its point shedding shards that rained harmlessly to snow like glitter. The echo pulsed, releasing plume that rose between dragons, blossoming into sphere inside net. From sphere emerged a figure, tall, androgynous, composed of swirls shifting between ice and warm mist. Eyes like dawn-lit glaciers regarded Nyra. Mouth shaped no words, yet voice formed inside every watcher's mind. A chorus of overlapping whispers. "We are many lost, seeking song." Nyra replied aloud, trusting translation to hum. "We are forging new song. Will you lend your note?" Echo tilt head, wavering. Lost, once bound, Fearstone fire. Valyria stepped up beside Nyra. Chain ended. "We choose breath, not spear." Echo regarded her, then extended tendril toward Valyria's circling above. Dragon and rider hovered. Tyrellas rumbled low greeting. Tendril brushed Tyrellas' flank, leaving frost etch that glowed, then melted into scale. Tyrellas did not shy. Echo's whispers deepened, tone less brittle. "Join? Learn shape." Nyra offered net. "Trace lines, we've owned shape with ours." The figure dissolved into mist, streamed through crystal web. Threads shimmered as Echo traveled each path, imprinting memory. A moment later the entire net flared, every rune igniting in prismatic wave. Then strands disintegrated into snow of light. Dragons banked as shining dust fell like petals, dissolving on riders' cheeks with sensations of cool water and warm sun at once. Where net had hung, a new being hovered, still mist-bodied, but now containing filaments of silverleaf root and veins of ember gold. The frost sphere heart glowed lavender. It stood balanced on currents unseen, raising both hands, each tipped with crystalline fingers that now ended in leaf buds. "We forge breath anew," it spoke inside them. "Not night, not flame alone. Balance." Nyra's knees weakened, not with fear, but relief so vast it felt shattering. She bowed head. "Welcome, Dawn Forged." The name resonated, the being pulsed acceptance. Dragons roared approval. Lamplighters wept. Children bowed, vines in their hair budding flowers despite polar chill. In following days they taught Dawn-forged wordless vocabularies. How heat can nurture as well as burn, how roots spiral to bear weight of stone, how song shapes wind for flight. Dawn-forged in turn taught them frost simmers, how ice lattices can store sun's warmth until night, releasing slow radiance. How snow crystals capture memory of footfall, playing ghost echoes if stroked right. How to heal cracks in glass by weaving microthreads of interlaced frost and fire. A compact formed. Pockets of echo shards spread across polar waste would gather under Dawn-forged shaping. They would sculpt spires of living ice to mirror Valyria's molten towers, linked by tunnels lined in silverleaf veins, forging heat exchange that might moderate extremes of global winds. Dragons would patrol, seeding root where frost lacked nutrients. Frost ghosts would send aurora flares as signals if imbalance threatened. While work began, Nyra penned messages to Valyria, sent by Ravendrake's bread for long flight. She described Dawn-forged, included shards encoded with visions so council could witness. Responses arrived in days. Astonishment, exultation, fresh anxieties about how rival powers might covet such alliance. She forwarded to Targaryens at Dragonstone, inviting emissaries to witness harmony firsthand, to quell budding rumors of a second doom. Weeks slipped like pages. The first joint tower, named Prismroot, rose at basin's edge, base of carved blue quartz ice, upper levels of ember-infused glass veins. Inside, temperature remained temperate. Dragon warmth fed crystals that in turn cooled air for lamplighters to sleep easy. Dawn-forged dwelt at pinnacle, singing constant low notes that stabilized entire structure. But in distant south, not all hearts rejoiced. Houses of old Volantis, seeing rumors of Frostflame armistice, feared losing monopoly on new glass trade. In secret dockyards, they funded black-hulled skimmers fitted with obsidian harpoons tipped in cooled Night King shards, stolen from archives by bribed maesters. Their plan: sail hidden currents, strike at Prismroot, capture Dawn-forged, force Echo to birth weapons under tiger banners. Rumor preceded fleet by days. Nyra learned from Lyseni spies who intercepted coded waves. She convened war council beneath Aurora sky, Arguments raged again between firepower and restraint. Dawn-Forged listened, then floated into circle. Harpoon stone echo pain. Dawn-Forged projected memory of chain long past. Blue spears through Iceheart. Must not repeat. Nyra nodded. We will guard, but not with terror. Let them see what cooperation defends. Plan formed. A wall of melody rather than flame. Lamplighters and children would craft resonance barrier, aurora-tuned frequencies that disrupt shardstone cohesion. Dragons would patrol high, visible but holding flame, their presence deterrent while barrier disables weapons silently. If Valentine still advanced, only then would Tyrion scale Aegis Drake, an elder brought north for task, descend in show of molten might, melting harpoons harmless in water. Execution night fell beneath blood-orange moon. Black hulls cut through slush swirl. Dragon sentries shadowed them, unseen at altitude. Lamplighter horns sounded, notes almost beyond range of hearing. Air shimmered, water rippled out concentric rings. On skimmer decks, obsidian harpoon heads fractured with tiny chimes, splintering to dust. Crews panicked, voices echoing over silent sea. Some dropped oars, others raised white silks. Nyra rode Emberzong to greet flagship mid-channel. She descended, mantle of copper wire feathers blazing with borrowed aurora glow. Valentine Admiral, eyes wild, fell to knees. She spoke not of war crimes or debt, only of futures. Cities cooled by frost spires channeling volcanic heat into homeless shelters. Trade lanes patrolled by dragons who rescue rather than raid. She offered them shards reforged into navigational prisms that could steer by starlight even in polar storm. No tribute, she said. Only pledge you will shape what you take, not shatter. The admiral surrendered fleet, swore to ferry food and iron to prism route instead of weapons. He returned south with stories that outshone lies of fearmongers. Years later, bards would mark that night as turning of the tides, the moment when threat became alliance through resonance rather than ruin. They would sing of Dawn-Forged walking into Volantis months after, sketching frost-runic murals on Tiger Gate that cooled hot winds blowing from Rhoyne Delta, ending cycles of disease. They would tell of dragons bearing seed across Summer Sea, planting silverleaf groves on islands where hurricanes once raged, the roots binding soil so storms shredded fewer homes. But on the night itself, after skimmer sails vanished south in peace, Nyra sat atop Prism Root's crystal balcony, legs dangling in frigid breeze. Dawn-Forged hovered near, luminescent heart pulsing steady. Emberzong curled below, wings twitched in dream. Leaf joined, footsteps silent on glass. Roots grow far, Leaf said, watching auroras swirl. Sometimes into hearts we feared barren. Nyra touched spiral scar on her palm, the cut that once bled into dragonglass spear. Scars show where growth began, she murmured. Growth never ends, Dawn-Forged whispered into minds, tone now blending thaw water and hearth crackle. We learn new songs still. Nyra gazed north, where horizon gleamed faint with pre-dawn. Then teach me one. Dawn-Forged lent chord, icy octave descending into ember bass rising half-step, resolving in major sigh. Nyra hummed along, Leaf added high trill. The harmony seeded aurora brightening, ribbons spooling outward. In Valyria far south, watchers looked up and saw bands of color blooming, heard faint echo of tune vibrating bridge railings. They smiled, not knowing source but feeling truth. World's music no longer sung in isolation, and so seasons turned. Prism Route became first of many forge spires marking Polar Rim. Frostheart Beacon, Emberwing Bastion, Weirloom Tower, each linked by relay of dragons carrying dream nets and lamplighter choirs. On equatorial seas, trade floated faster, guided by prism buoys. Disease maps shrank as frost-grown medicines shipped east, fire purifiers west. Small folk in Westeros spoke of silver leaves sprouting in ruined holdfast gardens, bearing fruit even after early frosts. The Citadel amended its treatise on Valyria. The freehold died, yet its ashes birthed the forged compact, whose tenets bind flame, frost, and root. Scholars debated but agreed the pivot had been not might but mercy. Nyra aged in that dawn, hair silvering, gaze bright. Some called her Emberguard. She waved titles away, preferring healer still. On her 50th naming day, she stood again atop the skybridge where first she'd released ember dust. This time she scattered handful of prism sand, gift from Dawnforged. It drifted higher, sowing new auroral seedlings in stratosphere. She whispered again, wing and root, one breath. Embersong's thundered answer shook foundations. Silverleaf petals rained, did not wither in warm wind. Dawnforged appeared, haloed by double rainbow halo, one ice, one fire. Together they watched children below chasing luminous motes that fled laughing hands. Night would come again as nights do. Somewhere, storms would gather, hearts would harden. But the world now remembered melody stronger than spear. Frost could cradle flame. Flame could warm frost. Roots could knit both. And so long as any soul sang that truth, the shard of living dawn inside humanity, and whatever kin they found in echoes of old dark would shine. The hush that followed was not silence but a breathing thing, steady as heart of newborn age. A lone gull, lost from warmer coasts, circled the crystalline parapets of Prismroot under a sky streaked purple and green. Its cry echoed against living ice walls and glass-veined buttresses. The note carried upward by draft until it melted into Dawnforged steady hum. Nyra felt the vibration through the balcony rail where she leaned, a pulse that traveled from frost to copper to bone. Winter's breath had softened here. When she exhaled, her sigh fogged only faintly before dissolving in the mild air curated by dragon heat and polar lattice. Below, the plaza of convergent threads stirred with the first bustle of festival day. 2 years had passed since Volantis's black-hulled fleet surrendered its harpoons, and the Forged Accord now marked each midsummer with ceremony to recall the night when fear turned to concord. Stall tents of spun-root cloth bloomed like lanterns around the plaza's rim, their canopies glowing with mothlight harvested from Dawnforged's auroral gardens. Children of the forest wove garlands of silverleaf and frost blossom, fastening them around the muzzles of patient dragons who crouched amid laughter, wings furled like bright sails. At rest, smiths from Valyria set out basins of molten tin where travelers could pour thin medallions, cooling them on etched snowplates to harden into keepsakes that shimmered half frost, half fire. Nyra watched artisans adjust the height of a newly installed resonance arch, an oval of intertwined crystal reeds that would amplify the festival's opening harmony. Light Loom, Anise Herkun's gold drake, knelt to steady one upright with her snout while 2 lamplighters guided thread-thin braces into place. When they stepped back, the arch thrummed a soft note, and every creature in earshot paused in unconscious alignment. Beast, child, and spectral frost form alike. The hush delighted Nyra. It was the same hush she had sensed on the caldera 45 years before. A breathing thing made of possibility. She pressed her palm to the rail's cool surface, feeling the faint heartbeat of ember underfoot answer with steady warmth. This morning, more than celebration awaited. Across the labyrinth of spires, a council of tides would meet at noon. Envoys from Old Town, from Karth, from the Jade Sea's swan ships, and from the still fractious remnants of Valyrian blood in Essos, eager to propose an ambitious weave. Conduits of frostflame currents stretched undersea, able to warm frigid ports and cool fever cities, powered by paired nodes of Dawnforged and Dragon. She lifted her gaze northward where the horizon blurred into mirage. On that edge lay the new lattice fields, singing mirrors glistening under constant aurora, first steps in binding polar jet streams and equatorial trades into gentler cadence. Their song already lessened the summer storms across stepstones. Fishermen hailed calmer tides. Yet some worried. Would humbling nature's rage invite hubris's return? Nyra believed balance lived in tending, not taming. Still, she carried caution like a second heartbeat. The gull swooped again, settling on the rail, cocked its head, studying her unblinking. She smiled and scattered a crumb of amberseed cake from her breakfast. The bird snatched it with greedy beak, then launched skyward, spiraling toward Dawnforged's abode atop the main spire. Its white wings cut through the auroral glow, and Nyra's smile deepened. Tokens of older worlds learning to trust the new. Footsteps approached. Valara, snow braids threaded with jade beads, cloak of frostweave shifting colors under dawn. Lines of weather and wonder etched her face, but her eyes held the bright focus of riding wind. "Shows look ready," she said, nodding toward the plaza. Lamplighters tuned the arch to dragon heartbeats. When Embersong exhales, the whole festival will resonate. Nyra chuckled. "Let's hope that resonance doesn't topple stalls." Valara's grin flashed. They reinforced poles with root steel, though if a few stands shake, the children will only cheer. They fell into companionable silence, watching dawn shade toward platinum daylight. After a time, Valyria tapped the rail. "Letters came on the night draft," she began. "Archmaester Ronald of the Citadel brings a proposal, wants to open a scholarium here for joint study of frostflame physics and green dreams, and Targaryen Princess Rhaena sails with him, bearing clutch of serpentine mosaics to adorn the halls." Nyra nodded. "Ronald seeks knowledge for its own sake. He'll keep better scholars honest. And Rhaena, maybe Dragonstone needs reminder sisterhood needn't be forged in blood rights." Valara's gaze drifted to horizon. "Not all share their eagerness. Whispers from Mantaries speak of dark alchemy. Dragon spawn twisted by remnant ice shards. They call them cryofangs." Nyra's pulse skipped. Mantaries would flirt with oblivion for pride. "How many?" "No count yet. Spies free tongue say 5 hatched, maybe more. They raid hamlets along painted mountains. Breath not flame nor frost, but something between. Shards of searing cold that flash freeze stone and set sap boiling." Nyra closed fist on rail. "Echo gone feral. Our balance undone somewhere." "Dawn-forged senses aberrations," Valyria confirmed. "Speaks of fracture song. Wants to weave healing net, but we must find them first." Nyra inhaled slow. "We cannot cancel festival or council, but after ceremonies, a wing of seed riders leaves for Mantaries. Take Tyrillus, Lightloom, Embersong, and Dawn-forged if willing." "We will ride," Valyria agreed. She hesitated. "You'll stay? Someone must hold the loom here for threads converging. And perhaps Fracture Song roots trace back to old blood feuds. Council may yield clues." She met Valyria's eyes. "Bring me any cryofang scale you find. I'll ask the Weird Dreamers to read its history." Valyria clasped her wrist. "For root and wing. For breath and balance," Nyra echoed. Festival bells chimed noon. Crowds filled the plaza, delegates garbed in silks, furs, bark, or mottled frostflax. Dragons lined the outer ring, tails curled, wings lowered into cradle shapes for children to clamber and view the stage. At center, the resonance arch glowed soft rose. Anise Herkun stepped forward, voice amplified by subtle crystal arrays. She spoke not in titles but in the simple Valyrian of hearth and forge, welcoming gathered souls to the turning of tides. Lamplighters raised horns. A chord swelled, low and round. Dragons joined, chests rumbling. Dawn-forged descended in a column of pale light, halo shimmering. Nyra watched from dais edge. On cue, Embersong exhaled a slow plume of copper-gold flame. The resonance arch caught the heat, transmuted it to shimmering wave. The wave rippled outward through crowd, tingling skin like mild static. People gasped, then broke into laughter. Silverleaf garlands shed tiny sparks that drifted upward and hatched into fireflies of pale blue, weaving above heads in swirling constellations. In that moment, Nyra saw no difference between prince and pauper, frost spirit and smith. All eyes mirrored the glimmer of shared wonder. This was the forging she had labored decades to protect. And yet, beneath her joy, she felt ember flicker, a forewarning of fracture song beyond horizons. Council sessions followed. Archmaester Ronald presented diagrams of thermal gyres, overlaying the Singing Mirrors network and proposing incremental expansions. Carthene negotiator Zara Mo delivered spice silk banners depicting the Jade Sea's coral citadels, offering staging points for southern strut lines. Rhaena Targaryen proposed sky routes for educational exchanges, dragons escorting Maester air balloons between libraries. All voices sought synergy. Threads wove easily, and by dusk the compact of gentle currents lay sealed in prism wax. Nyra retired to her observatory balcony, mind humming with maps and pledges. She rolled her shoulders, feeling weight lighten as stars pricked the east. Then she sensed it, ember change like plucked harp string gone flat. She turned north. Aurora arcs stuttered, dimming in patches. A hush, wrong hush, crept through lattice, frost-static itching skin. From spire apex, Dawnforged's glow flickered uncertain. A thunderclap split sky. Shapes tore outward from a tear of pale blue. 5, 7? Impossible to count as they streaked south. Not dragons exactly. Silhouettes elongated. Fins of frost jutted from spines, tails bladed. Wherever they flew, air crackled white and hissed. Shards rained like knives, slashing banners, cutting lanterns. Crowd panic surged. Nyra leapt to parapet. Embryonic cryofangs. She realized, magnetized to festival's heat. Mantaries unleashed them early, aiming for soft-belly morale. She whistled 3 piercing notes. Embersong rose from perch, copper scales flashing. Valaros and Valara sprinted from staging yard, saddles still rigged for tomorrow's flight. Tyrillus soared ahead, light loom launching behind. Lamplighter horns shifted to alarm chords, shrill tritones that told citizens to shelter under dragon arches. Dawnforged reignited, beam of violet lancing after the intruders. First cryofang swooped low, jaws vomiting spray of crystal glass that burned cold enough to crack steel. Plaza stones glazed white. An obsidian stall shattered like brittle sugar. Tyrillus intercepted, blasting standard dragon fire. Flame struck frost spray and exploded into plume of opaque steam. Through cloud, cryofang yet flew, though frost plating on flanks sloughed off, revealing raw muscle of blue ice. Nyra mounted Embersong midair, harness locked around hips. She wove path upward, issuing resonance commands to Arch via pendant rune. Arch responded, retuning to harmonic that disintegrated airborne frost particulates. White shards drifting toward crowds melted midfall into harmless mist. But cryofangs adapted. Second one banked, spewing frostfire beam that refracted through Arch, scattering chaotic frequencies. Crystal buttress cracked. Audience screams rose. Light loom rose to confront, unleashing cone of sound forged by lamplighters. Low sub-bass vibrato turned frostfire into swirling cyclone, redirecting it skyward like aurora funnel. Cryofang screamed. A metallic screech veered. Third and fourth cryofangs dove at Dawnforged, perhaps sensing familiar echo. Dawnforged opened arms, projecting net of starspear light. Beams struck their forechests, but instead of destroying, attempted to rewrite pattern. Veins of embergold wove across blue plates. One beast shuddered and slowed. Its eyes flashed lavender, wings stuttering, crashed into distant sea in plume of steam. The other resisted, tail whipping Dawnforged's lattice, sending shards spiraling. Battle spread across spire skyline. Nyra and Embersong pursued leader Cryofang, distinguished by black icicle crown along snout. It darted between support struts, leaving trails of freezing wind that cracked beams. Embersong answered with bursts of copper flame modulated to oscillate between hot and cold. Mismatched frequencies unsettled Cryofang's plating, causing patches to flake away. Nyra closed distance. She drew her dagger of shard glass and silverleaf steel, edge neutral to both heat and cold. As they passed a narrow sky walkway, she leapt, rolling onto Cryofang's spined back. Cold stabbed through boots instantly. Ice tried to climb calves. She plunged dagger into plating seam. Cryofang bucked, shrieking. Nyra muttered phrase she learned from Dawnforged. Ache to mend. Energy surged down blade, mix of ember warmth and root pulse. Blue plates around wound melted to translucent slurry, which rehardened into smoother surface shot with gold veins. Cryofang's flight faltered. Wing beats slowed. She slid toward neck ridge, repeating pulse. Ice melted, reshaped. The beast spiraled lower, screams shifting pitch. From rage to confusion to, perhaps, pain. When they skimmed over Plaza's far rim, Nyra wrenched dagger free and leapt, rolling across silverleaf awning. Cryofang crashed into Fountain Basin, sending geyser of steam and shards. Dragons circled overhead, containing other intruders. Lamplighters' horns shifted again, now weaving calm frequencies that soothed. Crowd hush reclaimed square, wounded tended by vine healers. For Cryofangs lay subdued. Two slumbering within root steel cages extruded from plaza floor, one in sea steam, and one frost reclaimed by dawn forged into calm mist that orbited Nexus Spire. Valaros approached Nyra, brow frost-burned. He held shard chipped from black-crowned Cryofang. "Scale for dream reading," he panted. Nyra nodded, fingers numb but eyes sharp. She pressed shard to pendant rune. It glowed, revealing swirl of sigils. Mantarian glyphs twisted around Night King runes, fused by alchemical bile. She felt nausea. Not just weapon, but message.
Montari rejecte accord.
Anise Herkun joined, voice steady though cloak singed. "Council sees our defense, but politics will spin. They'll ask how many more Cryofangs wait." Nyra steadied breath. "We travel to Mantaries at dawn, not as vengeance, but with loom of healing. If Mantaries spurns again, we will cage their blades." Valyria landed, dawn forged hovering beside. The spirit's glow softened, emanating apology. Echo twin shaped into Cryofangs had tasted only fear. They'd wielded shardstone unsung. Now dawn forged hummed resolve. Pattern of halt, not hate. Night deepened. Dragons curled round plaza. Citizens and delegates slept under scaled aegis. Nyra stayed awake at Spire's edge, shard warm in hand. Wind carried dawn scent though hours away. She studied horizon, beyond libraries, beyond jade seas, beyond fractured hearts. Breath fogged once, then cleared. Balance never final, forging never done. But hush she loved, the breathing thing, still lived, stitched now with new dissonances she would untangle. She whispered wordless prayer to seeds, to scales, to snow. Embersong stirred, dream rumble echoing vow. Dawn forged drifted closer, halo brightening fraction. Together they watched stars rotate over prism root, silent promise etched into turning sky. Night may fracture, but dawn remembers the path back to song.